Today we're going to be reviewing the presentation I made at the Steel Manufacturing Association's Environmental Committee meeting September 13th in Milwaukee. I've often heard Philip Bell, both in presentations and in written articles, say we have plenty of scrap in the United States, and I can't disagree with that statement. We're still a net exporter of scrap from the US, and the question really remains, though, are we using the technology or optimizing its value, particularly as it applies to decarbonization footprint and scope 3 emissions? Can we better optimize and create value at the same time reducing our carbon footprint? First, let me introduce you to GammaTech. We're a small company based in Dayton, Kentucky. We're a VAR, value-added reseller, OEM for Thermo Fisher Scientific, the leader in this industry, and the use of prompt gamma neutron activation analysis, PGNAA, and we're the exclusive means that technology moves and is applied to recycled metals manufactured by Thermo Fisher Scientific. We have 6 employees and we've been in business since 2002. So what is PGNAA? It stands for Prompt Gamma Neutron Activation Analysis, and we won't get lost in the nuclear physics of this, but the critical components are a very large instrument, 6.5 tons, with a conveyor belt flowing through the middle, a neutron source at the bottom of that instrument underneath the conveyor belt that is either a radioactive isotope or a neutron generator, emitting neutrons as the material passes through the analyzer, with 4 very high quality sodium iodide detectors looking at the reaction as that scrap passes through and is interacting with the inbound neutrons. They produce an outbound gamma ray. We deconvolve that spectra and can tell the elemental analysis of material passing through it. There are a few unique things that make PGNAA the only way to truly tell the chemistry of scrap. The first is that it's not surface oriented or sampling, it's full stream analysis. As you can see from this slide, several inches of material deep on the conveyor belt are passing through the analyzer. We're able to see all the way through that bed depth, that full stream analysis, and see not only copper that's there as free copper contaminations in the form of wire, motors, etc., but also the alloyed copper as a part of the steel matrix of the scrap itself. So it is truly full stream composite analysis, and other technologies like XRF don't have that capability. This is unique to PGNAA. The second thing is that the reaction occurs at near the speed of light, and it allows us to handle any production rate in line with shutters or in line with other conveyor belts inside of steel mills, as we'll talk about later. But we're on shutters and on processes anywhere from 30 tons an hour to 350 tons an hour. The technology is not process control or process production rate limited. The last key component is there is no residual radioactivity. The material can easily pass through radiation detection equipment outbound of scrapyards or inbound into steel mills. So there is no residual radioactivity. We don't activate the material in any way. These are the elements we're reporting in ferrous scrap: copper, nickel, chrome, and manganese. Copper, nickel, chrome represent the residual elements that can only be dealt with dilution in the furnace scrap charge, and manganese is there because the ductile iron foundries and some ferritic stainless steel mills have interest in the manganese level. As I said, we've been in business since 2002, and well over 23 million tons of shredded scrap have passed through our analyzers and been successfully melted at steel mills. Let's talk about why this should be of interest or why there's a problem. The scrap stream coming into shutters has changed over the years. I came into the industry in 1979, and in those days, a car coming into the shutter would have possibly 6 motors. Now it can have well over 36 motors. As well as the electrification that's happened all over post-consumer products has led to a higher copper load in front of the shredder. And the shredding process really hasn't changed. Well, in fact, it has changed. It's bigger, it's faster, which means that more of the material in the copper form of copper contamination is getting past the shredder and is unmonitored and creating great variability. We won't get into the details of shredding either, but there are several key components in the process that have a substantial effect on the quality of shredded produced. Again, particularly looking at the copper level, since it's of key interest to steel makers. The feedstock, as we've talked about, with its high variability and increased copper concentration, the mill itself, the shredding mill, how dense the product is exiting the mill, magnetic separation, air drops, and last but not least is the picking operation. Many shredders will talk to you about having multiple pickers on the line. And from our experience, if shredding operation is throwing humans at the problem, the war is lost. The key to making a high quality, low variability grade of shredded is controlling all of those factors with not heavy reliance on the manual picking operation. That graph below is what a shredder typically looks like when we turn the analyzer on. That is a typical commercial grade of shredded with an average of about 35 copper with a high degree of variability and range. Let's talk about what's happened to shredded over the course of time. If you took every ounce of free copper contamination in the form of wire, motors, etc. from a typical commercial grade of shredded, and you looked at what was just left as a part of the alloyed steel content, that copper level would be about 0.15. This is raised since the 1980s when I was looking at this when I worked at the David Joseph Company, when that free copper level was about 0.11. The change from 0.11 to today's world of 0.15 is just the influence of a higher percentage of steel from electric arc furnaces coming into that scrap stream and being shredded. In those 1980s, the average copper content of shredded was between 0.22 to 0.25. For simplicity's sake, we'll call it 0.25. So the difference between that 0.25 and that previous 0.11 was just copper contamination going down the ferrous belt and going to steel mills when it could have and should have gone down the non-ferrous belt. So the difference between 0.11 and 0.25, 0.22 was just simply that level of copper contamination passing through the shredder. The inconvenient truth today is that average copper content is about 0.35. So the difference between 0.35 and 0.15, which is that base level copper, is again copper contamination going down that ferrous belt to steel mills. That high variability and that increased copper content flows directly to your steel operations. Now let's talk about how we as a steel industry have been dealing with this problem. And again, visual inspection is ineffective at determining the copper level of shredded scrap coming into the mill, so that increased copper level and increased variability that have transferred into our steelmaking process, we've dealt with this by diluting the problem at the furnaces. Being able to put pig iron, HBI, DRI, ore-based products into the furnace to reduce the final copper content in the steel bath and keep us in specification. The other key factor here is that when you're also allowing copper contamination to be a part of that ferrous scrap stream, you're allowing other contaminants in there as well, both non-metallic and non-ferrous. We've had to account for that in our slag balance by adding a higher percentage of burnt or calcined lime into the charge to keep that slag balance and to keep those acids as they come into the process in check and keep our slag chemistry correct. That's the good news. The bad news is that each of those materials comes with a CO2 output, a scope 3 emissions associated with that. 1.2 tons per ton of pig iron, 0.85 tons of CO2 per ton of HBI, and 1.7 tons of CO2 per ton of burnt lime. Now let's look at how we can solve this problem. What can we do with scrap to optimize its value and help us reduce our carbon footprint? Well, if we simply went back to the chemistry that was available in the 1980s, back from the 0.35 to 0.25, not all the way back to a perfectly clean grade of shredded in today's world, which would be 0.15 copper, but we simply went back 40 years to the chemistry that was available then by controlling the process and knowing the chemistry of what we're putting in our furnaces. And we put that into a linear optimization model. And I'm using a very simple model here. All the steel makers in today's world have much more complex models that deal with slag chemistry, inventory, scrap availability, and steel specifications. But if we put that into this linear optimization model for example, an SBQ heat, I'm able to reduce the ore-based materials by 10%, in this case pig iron, which reduces the CO2 emissions, scope 3 emissions, by 12 to 13 tons per heat, and HBI 8 to 9 tons per heat. Moreover, since we're putting in a much cleaner grade of shredded with a higher yield and lower contamination level, we're able to reduce the lime, burnt lime in the charge, and the equivalent of 1 to 1.5 tons of CO2 reduction per heat as well. This doesn't sound like a lot until you scale it up to 1 million tons per year steel mill, and you've got 90 to 130,000 ton reduction in CO2 emission, or the equivalent of removing 18 to 26,000 internal combustion cars from the road per year. And as they say, don't bury the lead. This all comes at a cost savings. So much of what we do in reducing carbon footprints comes at a cost penalty. This comes at a savings because we're replacing ore-based materials with a lower priced yet higher quality and known chemistry gamma shred product that helps us reduce that cost in the overall scrap charge. And here's the important part. This is not hypothetical, theoretical, idealistic. This has happened in the past. That graph in the upper left-hand corner of the screen is the same shutter as the lower right-hand graph 6 months later that controlled the process with the exact same separation equipment, the exact same shutter mill, except able to know and report the chemistry of the scrap to their consumer base. That's happened. And in fact, in 2012, 14 shutters had analyzers and were producing a low copper, low variability, guaranteed chemistry grade of gamma shred, and about 150 to 180,000 tons, most of which were on the river system, were being produced by those shutters. We've often heard shutters talk about the high cost of knowing the chemistry of scrap. Well, the truth is, it's less than half of 1% of the purchase price of scrap. You can't even see it in the transaction. In truth, it comes out to about $1 a ton to know the chemistry. It doesn't relate to what it takes them to make a lower copper product. Having said that, though, the cost to know is less than $1 a ton. I've often heard of people on various news channels, CNBC and others, refer to the steel industry as the Rust Belt or the Rust Bucket industry. And that just makes me crazy. In today's world, if you walk into a melt shop or rolling mill or galvanizing line, pulpit, the amount of computer modeling, sensors, all the technology in play, and now including artificial intelligence, is overwhelming. It is anything but the Rust Bucket industry. So our suggestion is we reach across the aisle and we talk to our shredded suppliers and we work in cooperation with them to use technology in their process to control and understand their process and produce a higher quality, known chemistry, low contamination grade of shredded scrap that can help both of us achieve the goals of decarbonization. So in closing, we can use technology in today's world to work in cooperation with our scrap suppliers, allowing them to use that technology to monitor, control, and report the chemistry of the product they are supplying you, all of which can have a significant effect on our goal of reducing our carbon footprint as an industry. So this could be the beginning of a new age where we're working in cooperation with our scrap suppliers who are using best practices and advanced technology to understand, control, monitor, and report the chemistry of a low contaminant, high quality, guaranteed analysis grade of scrap that we can use effectively in our steelmaking process to lower our carbon footprint. Thank you.